Well, thank you for the introduction, and Protocol Labs and the Filecoin Foundation have been big supporters of Fluence Labs, and we appreciate that. You can't have decentralized compute without decentralized storage. You need both of them, and we all need both of those for this ecosystem to be truly decentralized. And so while we wait for my slides, I think the first one is going to be pretty obvious, but it's about ChatGPT and about the growth of ChatGPT. And I think everybody here has seen that. The stats are interesting. It's 1 million users in like a week and 100 million users in a month. And this is without a doubt the fastest growth of any consumer-related application in history. And that is catalyzing a tremendous amount of interest in AI. And if we go beyond that, you think about what's it used for, there's some terrifically fun uses for it. And we've seen people, I saw John Oliver did a comedy routine where he had a rap written about cats in the style of Eminem. So that is something you can do with it, but there's a terrific number of commercial uses as well. And on the slide you can't see, I have a list of those uses, which go from healthcare to finance to accounting, education, media, law, video editing, developers, code, both writing, debugging, a terrific amount of potential uses. But the problem is that we're just not getting on. I don't need. Nope. No. It's right here, the PowerPoint. Hooray, we're up. Okay. So. I'll just give this quick review. So here we are. This just is a graphic depiction of the scale of ChatGPT's growth, which I think a picture tells 1,000 words. So, 100 million users in pretty much 0 time scale, given everything else. And catching up here, commercial uses besides the fun uses are remarkable. All right, I have a request to go back for a picture on this slide. There we go, we're good. Too slow, next time. These are the commercial uses, but the problem with the commercial uses is we have these things called regulations and certifications. And this is just a snapshot of California as an example. These are all the professions for which a certification is required, which means a study, a test, and a degree. And a lot of these have to do with physical activities that relate to people and have a health component to it. But really what these are protectionist measures put in place by industries to protect the earnings and make it harder for people to actually enter those industries. And these go back, hundreds of years to guilds, right? This is nothing new, but you had very protectionist interests of every particular industry, particularly not just unions, but also white collar. And so it shouldn't be a surprise that one of the first industry reactions to ChatGPT entering it is the legal profession, where Bill Browder's son was going to go to a court case and have the court case against a traffic ticket argued via ChatGPT prompt in the ear. And the Bar Association found out about this because he publicized it, and they threatened him with 6 months in jail if he went ahead and did that, right? And this is clearly not who is harmed by fighting a traffic ticket with AI prompts in your ear, right? The only people harmed is the legal profession. And they are very scared of this, so came down very hard. This is the first example of an industry really recoiling against and fighting against AI. And I expect we will see much, much more of it. The other risk with ChatGPT in particular is these are centralized for-profit companies that have, and Google is as well obviously, for which if you try to build a business on it, you are subject to their pricing, their API, and anything you build on, they can decide to cut you off. Obviously, we saw this back in, for people who remember the Farmville Facebook, but we've also seen it happen on Twitter, third-party applications. Twitter closed those down as well. LinkedIn did as well. So whenever you have a valuable platform that has power, you try to build on it, you're at real risk of being cut off. So you need an open source alternative that you are safe to build on. Otherwise, your business can be taken out from under you at any moment. Next risk is what happens when ChatGPT scales to many hundreds of millions or billions of users. At that point, governments start to become interested. You know, what's the answer? Should I wear a mask? Should my kids be vaccinated? Was there Armenian genocide? You know, is ex-government corrupt? Right? These are answers that certain governments, first, may not like the answer. Second of all, different governments will have different responses that they want. And, you know, in Europe, as just an example, vaccines aren't offered to kids under 18 in a whole bunch of countries. US, you get them almost mandatory from 6 months, right? So how is this going to play out when you have a company that is creating answers to these questions that are being asked globally with very different government interests in what those answers are? Well, we can look to Twitter. And we now have every day more and more evidence of different countries exerting different influence on Twitter. And you can expect that to come from totalitarian companies like China, like Russia. That is expected. But democracies, India in particular, has had a very heavy hand with Twitter, silencing and banning opposition figures and not allowing protest videos and protest information to be shared a couple months ago. And they got very aggressive, threatening jail for it. It's also happened in the US, obviously, and let's not forget that, you know, you were banned for talking about a lab leak theory that now is relatively, mainstream. So I think you see now multiple reasons and multiple rationales for having an open, transparent, and free learning language model. And your first response might be, well, listen, Microsoft spent $10 billion in this. How on earth can open source compete? And the answer is, first, Bloom is already out there starting this effort. But Linux in 2008 estimated $10 billion worth of developer resources were deployed to build Linux. And if you've been starting to build Linux early on, no one or very few people would have given you a real chance of survival versus OS versus Microsoft operating systems. And they did it and are dominant now. And so I think what will happen is not a one learning language model to compete with Google or AI, but it will start much more specifically and narrow. You could have a DAO raise, for example, to focus perhaps just a model that's focused on pediatric medicine diagnosis, right? Super small, or someone get even smaller and say, you know what, I don't think minority children are particularly appropriately represented in broad LLMs, so I want to have a DAO that's just focused on the research around minority children health issues. As an example, that is a type, and so it's not clouded by data that's separate or that is distinct from that particular group. And so you could see those type of models be very specialized, much easier to fund and to build, and also be open and transparent, safe to build on. Once you have that, though, you end up with a whole suite of specialized open source models. The front end becomes very important at that point, because you want to have one front end that you can access and use all these models with. And the front end is also subject to potential censorship and vulnerability. And we've seen, Bing didn't like some of the answers that its model was giving after a variety of prompts. So it's limited the front end to only ask 6 questions, right? So this front end is also as important as the training of the data and as the training of the model. And so distributed serverless compute enters here, because that allows you to run this model anywhere and make it run the front end and then run the model anywhere to make it unstoppable. The other part is you can run the model and have proofs that the model was actually run and you weren't just given an answer that was already generated for somebody else for even a different question. And again, coming back to healthcare or law, you may care a lot that the model was actually run and actually generated the question that your prompt requested, and that model was a certified model run by the particular DAO that has been focused on that particular issue and was credible in it. And so what's required to run this type of distributed ChatGPT or learning language model? And you need distributed serverless architecture is what we think is kind of the critical piece here. The main point of it is a fault-tolerant design. And so you're not dependent on any network or connectivity provider or hardware. And if a host goes down, the application continues to function by traveling to other hosts. And distinction here, what doesn't work or what's not ideal, because when you think of decentralized compute, there's a couple other aspects to it. Compute at the edge and hardware marketplaces. Both of those are terrific solutions that are very usable and viable, but they don't work so well here, mainly because they don't have failover, at least in the ones that I've seen. And so it's compute at the edge or hardware marketplaces work, but they're still isolated to the particular location they're happening, so are subject to both censorship risk and can easily go, and much more easily go down. And so how does Fluence enter into all this? Well, it's a distributed serverless platform that's fault tolerant by default, and it obviously has failover. And it has a security model that verifies that computations have been completed. That's a critical piece that is you ask of any distributed computation. It also has a native language Aqua that makes building these front ends far easier because it abstracts out all the complexity of peer-to-peer applications and distributed applications, which is very difficult to build from scratch. And the marketplace where you can buy this compute helps drive price down. So, but if it's good for learning language models, this distributed compute actually has far broader applications and broader use to applications generally. And so applications can live on the distributed global network with no single point of failure and no single point of censorship in a very price competitive environment. And so it can scale up or down on demand and be free to move from any provider. And this gets to the cloud lock-in. You avoid cloud lock-in. And so if you're running a serverless compute, your application is on that, someone may be running instance at Google, and then you decide, I want to move to Amazon, you can move it to an Amazon server if someone is hosting there, to your own server, to somebody else. And that level of that ability to move from provider to provider allows both price competition to be terrific, and it also allows you to be free of the cloud ecosystems. And why do we not like cloud ecosystems? This is an example of Parler, but I don't think anyone's lives here has been dramatically impacted by the shutdown of Parler, but it just gives an example of the power of clouds to turn off your application if they decide you violate their term of service. And this was a big application, right? Millions of users, and it was shut down with like a day or so's notice. Why is that relevant for us? Well, guess what? Web3 is really dependent on Amazon. And I don't know if anyone's heard of Gary Gensler and the SEC, but but there is a risk here that we are all bearing. All these applications are using the cloud. And until we free ourselves from the cloud, we are at risk. And the cloud, notice, is not some white, puffy, benign entity. It's a storm cloud because it's dangerous. And we should all be very wary of it. Not only is it expensive, but it is a risk we all bear. And there's also centralized backends to a lot of dApps. And this, again, isn't anybody's fault. It's just the infrastructure hasn't been built yet to allow these applications and these products to move off of the cloud. And that's what we are trying to do. And we think that decentralized serverless compute is the next evolution of compute. So you started with mainframes. People were dragged kicking and screaming into the cloud, which is clearly won so far and has been an enormous success. But decentralized serverless compute will be faster, it'll be more secure, and it'll be cheaper. And so you get on-demand scalability, higher security, competitive pricing, it's more censorship resistant, it's fault tolerant. And this is, this is what basically we have to go towards, or else we are subject to the oligopoly of Google and Amazon, which I don't think anyone in this ecosystem wants. So compute is kind of the key core piece of that. And so the Fluence decentralized platform has two pieces to it, a developer platform and a computing marketplace. And the developer platform is designed to mimic the cloud stack. And so we have, again, no slides, which I just noticed, but it mimics the cloud stack with an AWS kind of Lambda analogy, the step function in REST API and Aqua, and then kind of Fluence CLI, which obviously enhances building. So there's a variety of, the idea is to make the journey building very similar to a cloud analogy, and if you don't, as much as we don't like centralization, people will still use the cloud. So we have to make it as easy and simple as we can in order to do that, and that's what we're working on doing at Fluence. This was actually really relevant to see, which we're not, but cloud native basically accesses services through an API. You cut off that API and you lose access to the microservices. With Fluence, you access the microservices directly through Marine. And so as long as you have access to the internet, your compute travels to each of the microservices you need to execute in order for your application to run. And that means that there's no API to cut off, and there's no one place that you can be shut down. Verifiability. There's two parts of this. Proof of processing. You want to make sure that your Aqua execution, and that's verified by every host along the way. And then also proof of execution, where you have ZK proofs. Oh, look at this, for Marine. And so luckily we can visualize the verifiability. But this was relevant. I just would love to be able to show that, which now I can't. It's gone. It only likes that slide. And then the final piece is a compute marketplace, which is global scale. When you have a marketplace, you are obviously driving pricing to the most competitive value that you can find. And Amazon and Google have 60% margins. Those margins aren't coming from nowhere. They're coming from everyone that's either using the services built on the cloud, or they're coming from the people building on the cloud. That is a lot of value to be distributed out to the ecosystem. And when you have a compute marketplace, that value will accrue to people building and then probably goes to people using the applications as well. So the goal here is to actually compress that margin and put it and allow us to build and use it to better our applications and better the universe versus Amazon's bottom line. So Fluence is moving forward. We've got the market. We've developed Aqua, which is the core language. We've done developer workshops while we're here. I encourage you to check it out. We have we have a handful of bounties that people are pursuing. The next step for us is launching a DAO, which is where our governance will take place. It's going to be a Swiss association, and the DAO will then likely issue a coin, which will be related to the use of the network, which is important, and that's part of the compute economy, which will allow hosts to be paid for compute, and then also users to actually make deals with compute providers and run their applications in a truly decentralized way. So, AI helps us maximize our potential, but it needs to be free, and compute needs to be free. Centralized compute will kind of runs the risk of wrecking this whole ecosystem we're a part of. So decentralized serverless compute is what we're building here. So please follow us at Fluence_project. And here is the website's fluence.network. And you can find us at Discord, fluence.chat, and Twitter, Fluence_project. So sorry for the technical difficulties, but thank you guys for coming and listening.